So let's get started with the questions and the answers. There's always a lot of questions, but that means, that you're making the best use of me when I'm here. I will try to answer the questions without too many added stories, otherwise it goes on all night. Dear Ajahn Brahm, may I ask what is the difference between annihilation and nibbana? First of all, how do you interpret Vijnanang Nirodhasa? No, Anidasanang, Anantang Sabatang Pahang. Thank you. Well, first of all, the second part of the question, Vijnanang Anidasanang Anantang Sabato Pahang. This is a poem. It's caused a lot of people to misunderstand. And I remember talking with Venerable, he did, okay, please go. He did most of the translations, the early translations of the Majjhima Nikaya. And he was being looked after by Bhikkhu Bodhi many years ago. And when I went to see him, we were discussing about things like this, Nyanaponika, the old Venerable Nyanaponika. And he was telling me, he said, the biggest mistake of translators is actually just to interpret what they believe is said, rather than interpreting the poems which have, never a clear meaning. Instead, they should always interpret those, translate those, in light of all the very clear translations and statements which are in the Pali Canon. An example of that, one of the famous poems which I could recite when I was young, was William Wordsworth. I wandered lonely as a cloud. And I thought, does that mean he's levitating? That's what a cloud does, it floats through the sky. This statement is poetry. And the whole meaning of poetry is not to be specific, but to get a feeling for what the Dhamma is. There's so many other places where a Buddha says very clearly that one who is fully enlightened and who passes away, we call that pari-nibbana. Nibbana was when the person gets the insight, which makes them an arahat. They're still alive. They still can teach. They still breathe. But like the Buddha at Kusinara, there comes a time when they breathe their last breath and they never get reborn anywhere. And this is one of the statements. I have not got it with me. I do believe it's in the word of the Buddha here. If I can find it now, I'll probably make this, because I might get stuck to more. Where's it, Nibbana? Well, anyway, I remember what it says, but they have the sutta passage in there. One who is enlightened, who passes away, there would never be anywhere when any sense from the body or the mind will exist or persist anymore. So it's a very clear statement that what parinirvana means is there's no existence afterwards. Oh, okay, here we go. 35. Should be in there somewhere. See if I can see it for you. Is it there?
34, 35.
Yeah. See if we can. Is it actually in there? No, it's still here. No, it's not the one I'm looking for, which is just so clear. Oh, it is actually on page 36. An arahat, an enlightened being, understands that the six senses, Samyutta Nikaya 48, Sutta 53. An arahat understands that the six senses, sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, and the mind, will cease completely and totally without remainder, and no other senses will arise anywhere in any way. This is another way one knows that there is nothing more to be done for an arahat, for the enlightened. And that is actually so clear. This one, even the word pahang is, it's a strange use of that word, because poetry does have strange uses of words. And I often was proposing Sabato Pahang is Pabang, which was, actually no, it's not, it was Pahatabang, means to be abandoned. So Vinyanang Anidasanang, it doesn't manifest. In other words, it stops. Anantang Sabato Pahang. So it's all just been given up. Now, people write dissertations about this. But when it says, what's the difference between annihilation and nibbana, cessation, the difference can be explained like this. I was a theoretical physicist before, and even just an ordinary physicist knows that there's some laws of physics which cannot be neglected, are always there, such as the conservation of mass and energy. You cannot annihilate mass and energy, but one can be transferred to the other. There's a certain amount of mass energy in this universe. It can either be increased or decreased. So how could this, please, if I'm going too far for you, please give me some latitude, because it's the only way I can explain this. The sum total of mass energy in the universe remains constant. Mass can be converted into energy, energy into mass, but the sum total remains the same. So, how could this universe come from nothing? And the answer is actually quite simple. That we have something in the world called energy and also negative energy. Negative energy is a massive object with a gravitational field. For me to transfer this in a little basket out beyond the gravitational field of the Earth has to use energy. This has a positive mass energy component and also a negative energy component. And that's proven by to be able to take this out of the gravitational field of Earth. That takes energy. And I remember many years ago posing this kind of theory or perception to our local professor of physics at UWA. His name was Professor David Blair. And we did many talks together because he knew I was a theoretical physicist before. I knew my stuff in physics. I said, what would happen if all the matter of the universe, all the matter energy, all came into one spot? What would happen? Would it explode? Or would it just balance itself perfectly and peter out? And I said, in my understanding, it would actually all balance itself. Every bit of energy in the universe would cancel itself, and there'll be nothing left. What I sometimes call poof, and then nothing. All the energy. And I remember him turning around and looking at me. Wow, Ajahn Brahm, you're so up to date. Omega equals 1. I didn't know what omega meant, but he explained afterwards. That's the total sum of mass energy in the universe. It doesn't get annihilated. The total sum was 0 anyway. So when it meets together, it just disappears, vanishes. Not annihilated, but totally balanced. A zero-sum game, they call it these days. That's our universe. Came from nothing, will end in nothing. And that's the same as you. A zero-sum person. You don't get enlightened, just the flame goes out. All balances, nothing gets destroyed. There was nothing there to begin with. That's why, to be able to understand Nibbana and Parinibbana, you have to penetrate non-self. There's no one in there to get annihilated. There's no one in there to begin with. That's one of Ajahn Chah's most powerful gifts to me, which many of you know this story, but it fits into this question. When he started to get very sick, the monks in Wat Banana Chat, no, actually kind of my fault, because I started learning the Vinaya much deeper than I was ever taught. And learning Pali first, so look at the Vinaya in its original language, in the Pali. And there you saw many things, that one of the buildings which was allowed in a monastery was a sauna. I always thought that saunas were invented in places like Sweden. But no, even in India, many centuries ago, in the beginning of Buddhism, monasteries had saunas. And please don't get any ideas you want to build one in Perth. It's hot enough there already. But because there were saunas, we decided it would be a lovely gift for our teacher, Ajahn Chah, to build a sauna there for him at Wat Banana Chat, for 2 reasons. One, that the monks at Wat Banana Chat could enjoy one. That was a major incentive. And the other one was so we could invite our teacher and look after him there. And it worked much better than we ever thought. One thing I did learn, that the German monks, they loved the sauna to be so hot. So I always made sure that if I went in the sauna, I got in there before the German monks came in. They had it so high temperature. I don't know if it was just them, but we went away always thinking, don't go into a sauna when German monks are there. It gets really, really hot. But Ajahn Chah would come once a week. And when he came, he'd always give a talk beforehand. Now, honestly, he was my teacher. I respected him enormously. Sometimes Ajahn Chah's talks were terrible, really boring. I've heard that before. And his delivery just wasn't energetic. But sometimes he gave brilliant Dhamma talks. Really brilliant. And this was one occasion he gave it just a fantastic Dhamma talk, really hit the spot. So what do you do after hearing a brilliant talk? What I did, there was plenty of other monks who wanted to help Ajahn Chah in the sauna. So I went back behind the hall where we'd just given that talk and found a quiet spot and just crossed my legs and meditated for 2 hours. It just no cushions, just concrete. But my legs were so good, I was so inspired, I just sat there and just disappeared. When I came out, I never knew what time it was. After I came out after 2 hours, I thought, maybe I can still help my teacher. When you hear a great talk, that's what you want to do. I remember being in Bangkok once, and this monk came up to me, American monk, and he started kissing my feet in Bangkok. That was really dirty in Bangkok. And he said, "Are you sure what you're doing? Can I disinfect my feet first if you want to do something stupid like that?" And he said, "No, no, 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 no." And he was doing that because he had so much respect for me. I started teaching him meditation. He became a meditation teacher himself later on. And that's how much gratitude he had. I understand that because the people who taught me, sometimes if you saw them, you just want to go down on the floor. That's the amount of gratitude you have. And anyway, that Ajahn Chah, I thought, maybe I can still help him in the sauna, so I walked towards the sauna. I was too late, he'd finished his sauna, but he was walking backwards. We're going to cross paths. And he was walking with his Thai attendant, the driver of his car. He'd already finished the sauna, the monks had done all their duties. So I was now going to meet Ajahn Chah alone, except with the Thai man. And that's when Ajahn Chah took one look at me. And as I understand it, he could see I'd had a very nice meditation, a very deep meditation. And as he looked at me, then I could feel him. It's a weird experience that he went into my mind and read it. My mind was so clear that's how I could interpret it, like it was actually inside of me. I don't know any other words to describe it. But I was very happy he was having a look. It's when somebody you respect so much happens to look in your bedroom and it's been freshly cleaned and all the sheets washed and everything's really tidy. Yeah, come and have a look. I was proud of my mind after a nice meditation. When I left my mind again, reading minds, this is how I perceived it. Not everyone will perceive it the same way. When he finished looking at my mind, he looked at me, and I will never forget what he said. Because he was senior, he could never call me Ajahn. He was the Ajahn. And so he said, Brahmavamsa, that's a full name. Sometimes I call myself Ajahn Brahm. That's for your convenience, otherwise it'd be so hard to remember Brahmavamsa. I remember sometimes going on aircraft, and as you check in, how do we pronounce you? But if I want to give them a hard time, Brahmavamsa, blah. So usually you call me Brahm or Ajahn Brahm. That's much easier to say. So Brahmavamsa, he looked at me and said, he wasn't unkind, but he was fierce. Brahmavamsa. Why? In Thai it was Tamai. And he realized, he had seen I was clear of hindrances after a good meditation. So he was trying his best to enlighten me there and then by just giving me a place to look. Why? And I replied, I don't know. I was still a reasonably young monk. I was being honest. And he looked at me. It was a stupid answer from a stupid monk. And what did he do? Did he scold me? No, he just started laughing. Wondered, how can these monks who got these big degrees from big universities and just had a nice meditation, how can they be so dumb? That's what I was. But then he screwed up his face again and said, Brahmavamsa, if anybody asks you that question again, I will tell you the answer. And this was really exciting. This is from one of the great monks of the last century. It's last century now. He said, I'll tell you the answer to the question, why? You're all paying attention. That's why I'm drawing this out. Some of the ways of being a good teacher is no excitement and make these stories really Brahmavamsa. Why? There's nothing. So if anyone asks you that question again, the answer is, there's nothing. In Thai, mai mi arai. Nothing. That's the answer to the question. You can't annihilate nothing. There's nothing there to begin with. It's this process ceasing. That's all. Just like mass energy. It doesn't get enlightened. It just balances itself out, a zero-sum game. Not annihilation. Do you understand that? When Ajahn Chah asked me, do you understand that? I said, yes. He said, no, you don't. Do you understand that? No, you don't. But it was a great thing. It was done with so much importance. I never forgot that. That's the answer to the question. There's nothing. Can you... Oh, okay. Same question. Can you explain nihilism versus Buddhism? On no reactivity, not generating karma. Yeah, I mean, you don't generate karma when you don't hold on to karma. How many times have I said to you, let the past disappear? You can see when you fully understand, what Ajahn Chah said, what the Buddha said, then it allows you to let go of things. Let go of the whole of the past. And when you start letting go of the past and having things like forgiveness, then the world may hurt you, but you never feel hurt. You can let go so much of the past. Totally. And because you let go of the past, you never tend to do any irresponsible acts which harm other people. Sometimes when people do hurt other people, they steal, or they rape, or they beat. Why do they do that? Don't just think they're bad people. In my whole life I've never met a bad person. I'm saying that. Even though I've been into jails, to teach. I remember once going into, just thinking of the name of the joint now, it was a prison in UK for the criminally insane. Broadmoor. Have you heard of Broadmoor prison before? They're the worst of the worst, get incarcerated, usually for life. One of the people I met there, personally, face to face, was this person called Ronnie Cray. Apparently he had a restaurant, an English restaurant in Hong Kong called Shoreditch. It's closed down now. And it was kind of dedicated to the Cray brothers. They had pictures of them painted on the wall. And that's why it brought back the memory to me of going into Belmarsh prison for the criminally insane and meeting Ronnie Cray. He's supposed to be a Buddhist now. He died. But at that time, he claimed to be a Buddhist, so I went to see him. And the last thing I remember of him was how polite and kind he was. And as we parted, he said, if ever I get any money, I'll send a quid to your monastery. He would want to be generous. A quid is like English money. He died before he could send any money, but nevertheless, that act of generosity really quite touched me when he was one of the most dangerous men in the whole of UK, Ronnie Cray. So that's one of the reasons why you can see the worst of a person has always got a beautiful heart somewhere inside, which if you can touch that, you can change them. when I was in UK, this is another story I told before. I got this telephone. Sorry, when I was in Australia, I got a telephone call from a prison officer in Australia, and he said, "I need to speak to Ajahn Brahm. No one else." I said, "Okay." I was there at the time, so I received a call. I said, "What can I do for you?" Have you ever noticed when you see me, especially in interviews, I say, "How can I serve you?" Remember that's what I said to you when you came into the interview? That's my joy. How can I serve you? So that's what I said to this prison officer. And he said, "Oh, Ajahn Brahm, I've been working in the prison service in Western Australia all my life. I'm soon to retire. That's been my career. But I've noticed something unique. I'm not a Buddhist," he said, "but all of the prisoners I've known who've come to your class, learned your method of meditation, when they're released, they never come back. The recidivism rate was 0. And that was one of the best pieces of praise I've ever got. The next thing he asked was, "Can you please come back to teach in our prisons?" And the first thing I said, "I will send somebody else." "No! We want you." The next thing I said was, "I'm very busy these days, having to go to Hong Kong." I am. I just teach all over the world and help here and help there. And said if I can, I would. We'll see how things go. I don't think I did go back to teach in his prison because I get too many other responsibilities. But the praise was something I'll always treasure. People who went to jail, imagine what that's like for your life and the life of the people who love you. And to be able to get them out of that jail so they never need to go back again. That's beautiful. That's one thing which I would always feel happy with, spending that time. People are already in jail, but how can they escape from jail? I don't mean illegally. So to change their way of looking at life, so they never need to go to prison ever, ever again. And I mentioned one person like that man who raped, gave him a job for 8 or 9 days being the cook in one of my retreats. And it's changed many other people's view of what a criminal is. And I say this honestly, in all the years, all the times I visited jails, I've never ever seen a criminal. I've just seen people who committed crimes. They're much bigger, much more to them than that hurtful, harmful event which put them in jail. They're much bigger than that. So, as a householder, I just don't want to do anything but meditate, which can be an issue when there is nothing and then picking up society and responsibility again. I don't find that difficult. I love to meditate. That's when I, sometimes even talking to you and teaching guided meditation, that becomes difficult for me. You know why? Because when I'm talking to you about the meditation, I'm also doing it. And sometimes you get, be silent. Remember Lao Tzu walking with his disciples, saw this beautiful sunset. And the disciple blurted out, "What a beautiful sunset." He wasn't watching the sunset anymore. Now when you know the difference between watching the sunset and watching the words, when I'm giving a talk I have to pay attention to some of the words. And my mind is just inclining in the opposite direction. It wants to be silent. Sometimes that's what I do. I shut up. Because I'm enjoying the meditation too much. It's tough. even there was some chants, Buddhist chants, which I have to do as a monk. And I remember one of those chants, it became impossible for me to chant it. I knew all the words, I knew what they meant. And it was actually spreading loving kindness. And as I was chanting that, my mind was doing it. And spreading loving kindness over the whole universe, up, around, below, to all beings without any exception. And there's many other words. And as I was chanting it, my mind was going in that direction. And they couldn't stop it. Just all the words stopped. I became silent. And when I became silent, because I was a leader, all the other monks thought they should be silent too. They weren't blissing out like I was. I just thought I was leading. And so I told the other monks, can we please not chant that in public anymore? Do it in private, but I just can't carry on. I just know it, I feel it, I go with those words, and you bliss out. And the mind just refuses to speak. It's not voluntary, it's just what happens. And then that's, you have to train yourself sometimes to be able to do your responsibilities, but then also to practice as well. I've become quite good at that now, making resolutions. And any one of you who sits meditation too long, so they can't get you out of this room at, what time does it close? 6:30? 10:30. Please tell yourself before you start meditating, I must come out at 10:25. I must come out at 10:25. I must come out at 10:25. In your own words. Repeat it 3 times. Pay attention to those words. And then when you come out, you open your eyes, you find it's 10:25. Usually 1 or 2 minutes either side. That's why I never said 10:30. 10:25 gives you time to open your eyes and get up and collect your things to go out. Otherwise it does create problems for other people who are trying to look after this place. Then they know what to do. It works. It's a simple act of kindness for others. That makes sense? And to say what happens, I've told you this story about the Vietnamese monk who was teaching a retreat in Sydney years ago. A Theravada monk. Now, Vietnam I always find a very interesting country, because the southern part of Vietnam is Theravada, the middle and north is Mahayana, but they all get on together really, really well. And so, this monk from the southern part of Vietnam was teaching a retreat in Sydney, and a 9-day retreat. And so they usually started with, get an orientation, and then have about 7:30 or 7 o'clock, half an hour meditation. Then he was going to give his first talk on a Friday evening. What happened, when it got time for the talk at 7:30 or 8 o'clock, he was still meditating. And all the disciples were sitting there waiting for him to open his mouth to give the first talk. Probably, I'm not sure, but I'd imagine that there's somebody recording it, waiting for him to start to say something. But he never did. 8 o'clock, he was still meditating silently. 8:30, 9 o'clock, 9:30. And even though the people who were booked for that retreat were very faithful, they decided at 9:30, it's a bit late, so they all went to bed. They left him there. And he never drank anything, he never went to the toilet, he never moved. And at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, they all came out to the morning meeting. He hadn't moved, he was still sitting there. The time came for breakfast, he was just still sitting there. The morning talk, still sitting there, never said a word. He sat there all day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. For 8 days. Now if you look at the sutras, they say 7 days is the max. He did it for 8 days. 7 days is just an approximation. He sat perfectly still for 8 days, without going to toilets, without eating, without drinking. They couldn't see him breathing even. And when he came out of his meditation on the 8th day, the first thing he did was to apologize to all the people who had come on this retreat. He got into deep meditation and hadn't given any Dhamma talk or helped with any chanting. And all the people there said, "No, that was so inspiring to see these things are still possible in today's world. Just looking at you was a Dhamma talk. Seeing how still you were was what inspired us. Thank you." And he said he made a mistake because what monks should do, lay people too, anyone, if you're getting into some nice meditation and you think that's going to be possible for you, then you make that resolution. I've got to come out at 8:30 to give the Dhamma talk. Otherwise you're being irresponsible. Does that make sense to you? Dear Ajahn, sometimes we don't want to disappoint others and we try to sacrifice ourselves. So how can we be kind to both ourselves and others? Thank you. That example of the monk who went into silence, into deep jhanas for 8 days is an example. Even he got it wrong. He thought, I disappointed others by being very, very still. You don't. You inspire. You don't mean to. You think you're just enjoying for yourself. It's one of the reasons why I always say that this life is not about me, it's not about you, it's always about us. And therefore you do inspire people no matter who you are or what you do. You don't sacrifice yourself, that's not Buddhism at all. If you sacrifice yourself, you're sacrificing others. What you do affects other people. If you're peaceful and kind, you can't do anything more than that. It's one of those, I think I mentioned that in the interviews. It's a lovely stories I'll share with you. I think I haven't said it formally in the talks. There was that young man. He came to my Dhamma school when he was so small, and I watched him grow up, and he became a doctor. And once he became a doctor, almost like a godparent. Well, you can't call it God because this is Buddhism, not Christianity. That's how you feel, like another member of the family. I've known him for so long, and he came to see me one Saturday morning because that night he was serving in the hospital on duty. And that night one of his patients died unexpectedly. There was no fault of the medical staff. It was one of these cases where this woman, only 23, had a very difficult medical condition, some genetic anomaly, which wasn't picked up. And she died. And it was him, because he was the doctor on duty, had to tell her husband. She's only 23, he was maybe a year or two older. Your wife has passed away. She's no longer here. you haven't got a wife anymore. It's such a difficult thing to do. And because especially you feel so responsible, you're the doctor. And he was stunned. He never thought she was so ill, nor did the doctor. And what made it worse, they had 2 small children. He had to tell them, you've got no mummy anymore. And that was just unbearable for him. He was a kind man. And so he came up to me and said, like, I can't do this job anymore. I've got to resign, do something else. Imagine how much that can hurt. And he said, I'm still a young doctor. It's going to happen again, for sure. And that's when I taught him that wonderful interpretation, meaning of life thing. Said, your job as a doctor is not to cure people. If you think it's to cure, you've misunderstood why you're a doctor. You're a doctor not to cure, but to care. You're in the caring profession. So make that your priority, to care for your patients and their family and their loved ones and yourself. If you make caring your main objective, you never need to feel you failed. You can always care for people. You don't always able to cure them. He was smart. The main thing was he trusted me. And so, oh yeah, I can understand now. And he went back to work. He never resigned. He was a very caring doctor. Had a wonderful life. Still has a wonderful life. And he cares for all of my monks if they have any problems with their intestines or colon. Like one of my monks, Venerable Mudito, who some of you know. And he was passing blood in his stool. And that can be a sign of colon cancer. So his doctor said, go to get a scan, of your colon. I forget what it's called, colonoscopy? So anyway, he tried. He rang up many people, but had to wait for months to get an appointment. And then when I heard it was going to take so long, he was a monk, and he was a good monk, I rang up my friend, who I saved his life, as a doctor, Sam, because he eventually became a colonoscopist, or whatever it's called. And then not eventually actually, he rang up Sam and got an appointment straight away. And I was very proud. It's just a little payback of kindness which I gave to Sam. I saved his career. So I decided to save my monk. He didn't need saving because it was just an irritation in his colon, not a cancer. But it could have eventually developed into a cancer, but certainly was caught well in time. And then we got the fee, the charge for a colonoscopy. It's very expensive, but not for us. All free of charge. You saved my career. How can I charge you? I love things like that. It's kind of not monetary. It's like kindness. So if you make caring more important than curing, no matter what job you have in life, even if you're a therapist, even if you've got a very difficult wife, last time I said very difficult husband, I got to be gender equity. If you've got to, please never try to cure her. Care for her. That's how I treated people in jail. I never tried to cure them of their bad habits. I cared for them. I was a friend. And that was more powerful than trying to cure them. Even when I tell those stories, I get into trouble because these are real. These are people I've known and seen, and it's work for them. And you get all these wonderful emotions of goodness. How does one disappear in meditation without consciousness of the disappearance? You get what we call Pachawekana jnana, which is you get the knowledge of what happened, not while it's happening. If you try to analyze what actually is happening, it disturbs the whole process of things like disappearance, of jhanas and stuff. But these are very powerful experiences. And an example of how difficult it is to describe these, that sometimes I describe them as a trauma. They're traumatic, but in a totally positive way. What's an English word for a positive trauma, good in every aspect, but which leaves such an indelible imprint in your mind? You can't not remember it. It's right there whenever you want to. It's powerful. It's like leaving a big imprint on your mind. Easy to remember. It's because of that, if it's like seeing a nimitta, I mentioned those this morning, and they're so brilliant and bright. And I remember one of those nimittas I got in the early stages. It was like brighter than the sun. It was like you're looking at a sun with your eyes open in midday in Australia, not here. Because I remember seeing the sun one evening, the first evening I came here. It was a clear day, but the sun was a big red ball. I don't know if it was clouds or pollution, but you could look straight at it, and it wasn't blinding. But I mean, the real sun, say in Australia, if you try and look at that for a minute, you go blind. I remember that was one of the feelings which I had. Well, if I keep looking at this brilliant nimitta, I'm going to go blind. That's, the misunderstanding of it. And then you realize you're not seeing this with your eyes are closed. You're seeing it with your mind. It can be as bright as it wants to be, and you never go blind. And one of the other things was you get so much bliss. We're supposed to have bliss in these meditative traditions. So if you have some bliss coming up in your meditation, don't think you're doing anything wrong. Yay! You're getting there. So please trust the happiness which comes in meditation. Do not be afraid of it. It's totally beneficial. But I remember one experience I had, and it was so blissful, I thought, a human being cannot take so much pleasure. Remember, I'm a monk. It's a different type of pleasure. And when I thought that, how blissful it is, and now I can't take any more bliss, then I decided to experiment. I was always a bit rebellious. So I experimented and I found this great insight. There's no limit to the amount of bliss which you can experience in deep meditation. So go for it. And in here somewhere you'll find, again I don't know exactly where it is, but you'll find a quote from the Pasadika Sutta. And that's when the Buddha was teaching one of his disciples. If the people who don't know about meditation from other religions, they ask you, you monks, can you enjoy yourselves? Can you experience pleasure? And they said, depends on what type of pleasure. If it's pleasures of the five senses, then no. If it's pleasures of the mind, yes. So what happens if you indulge in the pleasures of the mind? You really go for it. He said anyone who indulges in the pleasures of the mind can only expect one of four results if you indulge in it. And those four results, not a fifth result, the only four things which can happen to you are stream winning, once returning, non-returning, or full enlightenment. I remember first reading that, wow, that's what you're supposed to do. So you can indulge in the max. Do you want a happy path to Nibbana? That's it. I don't know why it was. Because this was kind of religious, this Buddhism and meditation, I always thought you're not supposed to be happy. And no, one of the reasons when I was a young meditator, and I decided I've got some free time, I want to be a monk for 1 or 2 or 3 years. This is what I thought. I had a good career, good education, healthy, young. I thought I'd go to Thailand, become a monk for 2 or 3 years, become enlightened, and then come back and carry on my career, find a nice girl and get married, have a family, but get enlightenment out of the way first. That's how dumb and stupid I was. Because I hadn't grown up in a Buddhist family and had good teachings. But I was still, because of good meditation, I was always very happy. And I remember just many of the people which I met in the Thai temple. I went there because the Thai monks were more happy than the other monks I met. And so when I went to that temple, I met many other people who'd been to Thailand, and I mentioned to them, I'm going to become a monk, and said, "What, do you know any good monasteries to go to?" Some of them knew Ajahn Chah very well, but they never told me about him. And later on, when I saw them again, I said, "Why did you never tell me about Ajahn Chah?" And their answer was, I remember one of those men I asked that question from was Lance Cousins. He was also at Cambridge. And Lance Cousins, when I asked him, "Why did you never tell me about Ajahn Chah?" He said, "You were too happy. I didn't think you were serious about being a monk." That's what they said. The idea was you're supposed to be learning suffering. And so it means if you're laughing all the time and telling jokes and smiling, you can't really be practicing. How dumb that was. But I also remember in the Buddha's story of his enlightenment saying something similar. He was not enlightened yet, but when he remembered his time under the rose apple tree, when he first experienced the bliss of the first jhana, and later on, when nothing else was working, he commented, "Why am I afraid of that bliss which has nothing to do with the 5 senses or any other defilement? The bliss of the jhana." And then he said, "I will not be afraid of that bliss. This is the way to Sambodhi, to enlightenment." It was. That was his big breakthrough. Please don't be afraid of the bliss of deep meditation. That will give you the seeds of full enlightenment. Okay, oh my goodness. Did you find that quote from Pasadika Sutta in there? Okay. I know it's in there. In meditation, is the mind in a formless sphere? Depends how deep meditation you are. The mind is always in a formless sphere. The nature of the mind, where does the mind exist? You know, one of the things which is said, which is totally understandable if you've had some deep meditations, that even if this universe ends, one of the ways this universe will not last forever. This universe will either, any scientist knows that, will either run out of energy and go in the big whimper, or big bang again, it'll just all come together. But it doesn't actually come to a bang, it just peters out. This universe also suffers from anicca. So when this universe finishes, what happens to the mind? And that's where you will read that beings, for the most part, get reborn in the realm of the second jhana. Because there's no other place to go. So if you don't get enlightened, at the end of this universe, you've got a long wait. So I'd actually start practicing now, instead of waiting for a few more billion years. But eventually the mind will continue on until it gets parinibbana. So it is formless, it's not affected by the form of the five senses. That's why also, if you do experience like a first or second jhana, let alone the deeper ones, you become invisible to Mara. Mara cannot find you. They say it makes Mara blind. Mara the tempter. In those jhanas, you're impenetrable. But I don't know if I've told you this, but I always love saying this because it inspires me. If ever you do experience even a first jhana, this is how the Buddha described it. Experiencing the word Sambodhi Sukha. And when I learned Pali and saw that, ooh, because Sambodhi means enlightenment. You experience the happiness of enlightenment, the taste of enlightenment. This is how the Buddha said. So anyone who's, it's not enlightenment, but it's blooming close. You get a feeling for what enlightenment is. Closest you can experience it. And also I said this to the monks who recently came back from a visit to India. I said this is based on the first teaching which the Arhat Mahinda gave to King Devanampiya when he landed in Sri Lanka. The first Buddhist sutta recited in the land of Sri Lanka. And the words was the Chula Hattipadopama Sutta, the shorter version of the elephant's footprint simile. And sometimes I've given talks myself. Why did the Buddha choose that sutta to talk to the king? Because it's the Arhat Mahinda was actually saying, how do you find a big elephant and realize it's a great big elephant? You can see its footprint, but that doesn't mean that that's a big elephant there. There could be many other animals trod in the same place, and it looks like an elephant footprint. But you follow that elephant footprint, and then you might see a big branches being torn off the trees. But that doesn't mean it's a big elephant. You may see the brush marks against those trees. That still doesn't mean it's a big elephant. But when you actually see that elephant, then you know it's a big elephant. And in the sutta, if you go to Lumbini, that's not where the Buddha was really born. That's his body. That's where it was born. You go to Bodh Gaya, that's when the enlightenment happened. That's not where a person became enlightened. It's misunderstanding what enlightenment is. Sanat, Kusinara. If you want to go to the places where the Buddha actually lived, They're not physical, they're spiritual. And that's what it says in the Hattipadopama Sutta. If you get into the first jhana, that's one of the first places where the Buddha spent so much time. Then the second jhana, the third jhana, the fourth jhana. Those are the 4 holy places of Buddhism. So I said this to the monks, if you really want to go on a pilgrimage to see the Buddha, you don't need to get an airline ticket and book all of these stuff to go to India. You sit down right here, let go, achieve jhanas. Then you'll experience what the Buddha experienced. That's where you go on pilgrimage, inside. Do you get there, or am I going too deep? Is that okay so far? Okay, it's only almost 8 o'clock. We've got another half an hour to go. And many of you needed to go to the toilet. It's all recorded, isn't it? So it's great. So if you need to go to the toilet, just go. And then it's all recorded. You can always come back afterwards and catch up on what was said. Next question, are nimitta like a kasina? No, kasinas are like nimittas. Kasina is like a light which you imagine. It's very hard to do. But some of you may have done nimittas in a previous life. Like this gentleman, he's Yorkshire man, called Eric Williams. You may have seen him over at Dhammasara. Just one day he was just on a bus or a train and looked at one of the advertisements which had this blue-coloured image. And he looked at that, he could go right inside of it and close his eyes, and that blue image was still there. They use kasinas to create nimittas. Lights which you find attractive easily. Forcing your mind to focus on these lights doesn't work, it's too much energy. He had a natural affinity for it. And that's one of the reasons why it's very rare to see someone who uses nimittas to practice meditation successfully. Uses kasinas, to practice successfully. So if you ever want to try this, usually the most simple image you can make is like a circle. You usually paint it just or print it on a piece of paper, so it's a little card in front of you. Put it in front of you, the simpler the better, and of a colour and intensity which you find attractive. Not like a washed out blue, but a very beautiful blue. That beauty is important because that will make the focus much more easy. And then you look at it, and then close your eyes until you can imagine it in your mind as clearly as if you're seeing it with your open eyes. And then, not to see it clearly, but to maintain that image. The next thing that happens, if you're successful, it's a colour which you find draws you in. That colour, like a nimitta, will actually become a purer version of that particular colour. That's one of the ways which you can know that this is a nimitta, not an imagination. The colour, no matter what colour it is, and the colours are not important, but its purity, its brilliance is important. So if it is like a yellow, the only words which I know how to describe it, it's more yellow than any yellow you can see in this world. If it's blue, it's a beautiful, deep blue. And they don't have blues like that in the world. You're seeing it with your mind. Even this one gentleman, he was the first man who said that his nimittas were black. And I thought, that can't be the case. But he said it was the most beautiful black he'd ever seen in his life. Like deep, beautiful, pure. When he started saying things like that, I thought, okay, yeah, that's a nimitta. This is natural. This is how it appears. So it's very easy to stay with, and it brings you lots of piti sukha. And after a while, just like nimittas, you find yourself either being enveloped by that nimitta or just being pulled into it. And if ever that happens, please let yourself be pulled in. Because when disciples, followers, students say, yeah, they felt themselves being pulled in, but they were afraid. Oh, you missed a great opportunity. Please, don't give way to fear or excitement. Enjoy this to the max. You're perfectly safe. Has amazing benefits. Okay, I say this, I haven't told a funny story or anecdote for a little while. But I've said this before, so you remember this little story. The only thing you have to be careful of, if you go into these jhanas, you tend to lose your hair eventually. Just like me, you just want to renounce. You've got another pleasure which is way better than anything you can get in the world. But anyway, kasina's possible, but it's unlikely. So I know many Thai people tell me, oh, they do casino meditation. Kasina, not casino. What does jhana feel like? The biggest bliss you've ever had in your existence. That's why I was saying, first jhana, sambodhi sukha. This is the happiness the Buddha felt. That's what he was saying there. If you know your Pali and know what these things mean, because you've read so many suttas, that's why it's spooky. You've experienced yourself, what the Buddha felt when he got into his jhana. This is much more close to the Buddha than visiting any of these holy sites in India. This is really... I don't know actually what word to say, not spooky, not creepy, but just, I usually say like goosebump raising experiences when you realize what you've just been in. What are some techniques for meditating with back pain? First of all, find a comfortable position, the most comfortable position you can get. And if that doesn't work, then meditate lying down. If that doesn't work, just meditate just with, some water bottles on your back. If that doesn't work, I haven't told a story about mindfulness yet, but one of the monks over in Bodhinyana monastery had terrible back pain. And so he went to his doctor, and the doctor gave him a scan of his back and said, unfortunately, there's nothing we can do. There's some congenital defect in your spine. The only thing I can recommend is don't sit meditation more than 10 minutes. That was terrible. It's like telling a cook not to eat. So that's what I do, that's the love of my life, said this monk. It wasn't me. And so this monk got this brilliant book from a New Zealand man, doctor, therapist, whatever it was, Cure Your Own Back. And one of the things it said in there, for someone with a condition like you, says you've got a congenital spine defect, even surgery is too dangerous. But what you can do is a couple of muscles on either side of your spine, which most people don't know about. So he said, with your hand, it had the location of those two muscles clearly marked on this little diagram in the book. Just every morning for 15 minutes, rub your hand along those muscles on either side, 15 minutes each, you're actually connecting, making a neural connection between your brain and those muscles. And keep doing that every morning for about 15 minutes until you can feel those muscles without needing to touch them. Once you can feel them, then the next stage of this therapy is to learn how to move those muscles. Once you can feel them, it's like trial and error. Once you can start moving them, you've got that ability to move those muscles on either side of the spine. You've learned. Just like you learn how to lift your arm or to move your hand. And once you can move them, then exercise them 15 minutes either side every morning. And that's what he did. Those muscles which even I don't know exist, he said, this monk learned how to feel those muscles, and then how to stretch them, how to exercise them. And soon those muscles became so strong, much stronger than my muscles on those either side of the spine. They will balance and counteract the weakness in your spine, and you'll be able to sit meditation. And it worked for him. How he used that mindfulness technique to learn about the existence of these muscles, and then to be able to stretch them, relax them, until he could exercise them, and they became strong. They compensated the weakness in his back. It worked. I thought it was brilliant. Oh my goodness. There's more questions I still need to answer than I've answered. Dear Ajahn Brahm, may I know what I should do if I smell someone farted next to me during my meditation, or strong coughing? Should I stop for a while? No, give loving kindness. And this is one of the reasons why I say anybody who does pass wind, out of compassion for others, please sit in the back, so there's no one behind you except a wall. If you sit in the front, then many other people are affected. If you sit in the back, then no one is affected. So now I know why people who sit in the back always sit there. No, please have kindness. Just like that guy, very quickly, that he had sinus cancer, came to one of my retreats. Beginning of the retreat, I should have told the participants, but I forgot. He was breathing very loudly, always to his mouth. And people say, can you please tell people to breathe quietly on the retreat? When I announced why, no one complained again. They realized this person was trying his best. He had a death sentence. The doctors had given up on him, no more that they could do. And when I told everybody, they were so compassionate towards him. It didn't worry them at all. He wasn't doing this intentionally. And the lovely thing was, at the end of the retreat, I always say the last meditation's the best. He was telling me nothing was happening, just as worse as it was when he came in to the retreat 9 days earlier. But I was already in the car, about to be driven to Sydney Airport, and he came running after me. I said, "Bob, please don't go yet." Well, his last meditation, it's always the last meditation, he said he heard a popping sound. His tumour had receded. He could breathe through his nose for the first time in I don't know how many months. Not imaginary. That's why he was so excited. It was only for 1 minute. And then his tumour closed up again. But he was so motivated after that. 6 months later, this guy came to see me in Sydney. "Do you remember me?" "No, I don't. I see so many people. And sometimes I give these really big talks for a few thousand people. And they said, "We saw you at the BMICH in Colombo. It's a big international conference hall, about 5,000 or 6,000 people. I saw you there. Do you remember me?" "Oh, come on, give me a break." And of course I said no, I have to be honest. And he laughed, and even if he did say his name, I wouldn't have remembered him, because someone dying of cancer looks very different than someone who's recovered. You know, all his facial muscles were back, he looked strong. And he said, I carried on your meditation, and the cancer went into full remission. I'm healthy now, I'm going to live. He said, I just came to say thank you. And also, to say I'm going to spend the rest of my life, however many months, years I have, teaching others how to deal with cancer in this way. If someone said that to you, how would you feel? That just adds to my happiness. Oh my goodness. It's kind of small print. So if anybody passes wind or coughs, please be compassionate towards them. They don't do that on purpose. It's just the nature of the body. There is a sutta where Mara gets into the mind of people giving offerings to Buddha, so that when the Buddha went on alms round, those people did not offer alms. However, they accumulated bad karma, even though Mara influenced their mind, as it was not their minds, as it made their minds, and they're not their minds stopping giving the alms. So if a person is hypnotized or is sleepwalking and does something unknowingly, due to that, does such a person accumulate bad karma? No, because the karma has to come from intention. Chedanahang kamang vadami. It's a quote from the Buddha, that its intention is the karma. If you have no intention, then the karma is neutral. What's the most important things in your life? No things. Okay, I haven't told this story for a while. One of the things when I was a student I had, which students don't have these days, is time. At Cambridge we had 3 terms a year when you had to be in college. Those 3 terms were each 60 days each. Only 180 days of a 365-day year had to study. Most of the time you were free. And even when you're supposed to be studying, I remember the senior tutor telling me when I first went up to Cambridge, he said, don't just do maths or physics. There's some great minds in this university, great professors, some are Nobel laureates. If they're giving a lecture somewhere, go and listen to it, even if it's in literature. Make sure you make use of this university, not just to learn your subject, but explore. And I do, to this day, remember just one of the things I was attracted to was Russian literature. And I remember reading Dostoevsky, and one time I finished all my work for the term at Cambridge really early. And so I spent 3 or 4 days doing nothing else but reading War and Peace, just in one go. I love that book, especially if you've got no distractions at all. You get up in the morning, you've done all the work, so you just read. Stop for lunch, read again, stop for tea, read again. Just going right into it. It's a very big book. But that gave me a love for Russian literature. And one of the pieces of literature which I read was some short stories by Russian authors. And that is where I discovered the Emperor's 3 Questions. And when I read that, my goodness, that changed a lot of how I looked at life. That's one of the most influential stories which I ever read. And I think many of you know what that story was in brief. An emperor was up to here with religion, always arguing with each other. Who's the best? Who's the most correct? Because he was an emperor, had power, he decided to make up his own religion, his own spirituality. And after much discussion and thought, he decided there's only 3 questions you need the answers for to have a very successful life and a good religion. And those 3 questions is, when is the most important time? 2, who is the most important person? And 3, what is the most important thing to do? So now, I'm going to ask you that if you know the answers, please be quiet. It spoils my fun. When is the most important time? Yeah, that's the obvious one. Now's the only time you ever have. Who is the most important person? I heard people mumbling, yourself? Is that the most important person? No, that's wrong. Totally wrong. Is it me? No. Is it the Buddha? No. Who is the most important person? I remember telling this story in Cathay Pacific, and they liked that so much. They said, the HR manager was there, said, I'm going to incorporate that into all forms of training on Cathay Pacific. Who's the most important person? And the answer is, the person right in front of you right now, whoever that happens to be. If you're with a client, give them importance, like they're the most important person in the world. Sir, you are the most important person in the world to me right now. Now you are. Because that resonated straight away. I was this hairy young student when I was in Cambridge. And sometimes after a lecture, you had a question to ask this very famous professor, and they'd pay no attention to you. They just wanted to get rid of you. You were not important. And that felt terrible. So you always make sure that whoever's in front of you asking a question, they're the most important person in the world to you. That's how you relate to people. And a lot of the time, I'm by myself. When I'm in my room and no one else is there, then I'm the most important person. Now, what's the most important thing to do? I think I've already given you that answer with that doctor. Not to cure people. My job is not to get rid of your defilements, not to cure you, but to care for you. That caring is way more powerful. And your defilements just go. When you care for the monster in the emperor's palace, the monster gets smaller and smaller until the monster eventually just vanishes completely away. To get rid of the hindrances in your mind, get to know them, care for them, and they vanish. The Emperor's 3 Questions, a beautiful story which I apply to so many things in my life. And if I can relate to you, if you find you can approach me and I can answer questions which make a lot of sense to you, it's because when you ask, I give you importance. And I care. Anyway. Okay. I am a bit confused about I'm a bit confused with the observate, self's mind, self-care and non-self. Oh, thank you. If it's like the word self, this is just the way these words are used in our language. So self-care means not just caring for yourself, caring for all other beings, whoever's right in front of you right now. If you're by yourself, you should care for this one. You don't need to call it a self. I often say, this being who bears your name, this process by which you are known by, care for it. And non-self. It's wonderful that non-self is there. You're free. Nothing to worry about. There's no one there. Okay. In your book, oh my goodness, page 97. You know it better than me. Oh yeah, okay. It is natural that one who is virtuous becomes free from regret. I am a person who always regrets, and I cannot go to the next step to become happy. So would you please share more in depth about how virtuous can stop my regret? Even virtuous, I could still do things wrong, and I still regret it. Thank you very much for your teaching, Ajahn. Do things wrong. Again, who here doesn't do things wrong in their life? I do many things wrong. That's why I learn from my mistakes and do better next time. I remember as a school teacher learning this. When I had to set an exam for the kids I was teaching, then I asked some advice. I never learned this in a school of philosophy or the educational part of, my ability to teach. And I remember this wise teacher said, don't set the exam too hard. I'm setting an exam in math. If you set it too hard and your students only get 40% or 30%, they will all come away from that exam, not blaming me, the teacher who set the exam, but blaming themselves. I can't do maths. So never set it too hard, never set it too easy, otherwise it's a waste of time. Please aim for an average score of 70%. It was a 70% rule. Because if you get 70% in an exam, that's a good score. You can do maths. But for me, the teacher, the most important part was the 30% where they made mistakes. That's when I could get feedback. I could understand what they never understood. So when I marked the exam results, I'd always look for where they made the same mistake. And that was my fault. I needed to focus more on that so that they would never make those mistakes again. And the 70% rule became really important for me. I never expected myself to be 100% when I gave a talk. 70%. Because I can learn to make a better talk next time. Every time we make mistakes, it's not a personal fault. It's where we have the opportunity to improve and learn more. That's why I always think that 70% is the best score in life. So if you haven't got a partner yet, and you're looking for one, if you're a girl, never get a guy who's 100%. 70%, a few faults, that's the best. Because they can learn it. And never get a wife so is 100%. She'll drive you crazy. 70% is the best. That's where we learn. So you're not perfect. If you were perfect, it would be hardly a point you coming on this retreat. You'd be teaching it. Okay. Is there a particular message and or technique that derives from the forest tradition of Thailand that is unique to Buddhist practice? That's all I know, so I can't say it's unique. I just know it works. One of those practices, again, going on the idea of 70%, every time when people say that they've been traumatized, they're not perfect, they have even deformities, because of some accident they can't speak properly or whatever it is. I usually tell them, I've been a forest monk all my life. I've stayed in so many different forests in this world. Like even last time I was here, you very kindly took me to this forest where I had a lunch, but then I went up into the forest and sat on this beautiful rock. I never realized there were such beautiful forests, here on Hong Kong. But every forest I've ever been to, when I look at the trees, I've never found a perfect tree in any forest in the world. And that meant a lot to me to understand that. All the disciples which I've seen, met with, and had talks with, and had lunch with, every one of you, I've never seen any one of you which is perfect. You're all bent and crooked, with damage on the trunks of the trees. You always got leaves which have fallen off or been eaten by bugs. You're all imperfect. That's why you're beautiful. That's why you belong. I told this group of clients of the mental health service in Perth that every one of you is damaged. That's why you've got a counsellor or a therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. You're all damaged. Just like all the trees in the forests where I've lived. You're damaged goods by life. Everyone is. So number one, welcome to this great forest of humanity. You're not rejected, isolated. No, you're not the same as other people, so get out of here. That's not you. You belong. And the second part was, and this is so true, your favorite tree in any forest would always be the one which is most bent and crooked, which has got many branches torn off by the storms, because that's where the animals live. You're the most beautiful ones, the ones I like the most, I'm being honest. The crooked trees are the best. So if you're crooked, bent, twisted, damaged, welcome. You belong. And number two, you become the most beautiful. I love that simile. That's because I've lived in a forest for my whole life. Well, except when I come into a hotel like this one. Anyway, let's do another question. A layman person, if we get addicted to retreat and meditation, don't go to work, is it appropriate or diligent? Thank you. I'd say it's appropriate. Because these days, the therapy industry is huge. So, you can go off and get a job with the expanding Bodhinyana International Foundation, organize more retreats, teach a few retreats yourself, raise some funds to get your own center, look after monasteries. How many monasteries are there in Hong Kong? You can get one yourself. And if you want an abbot in that monastery, you can ordain Freddie. Why not? Or a nunnery? What are you doing? Where are you meditating? Are you available to be the head nun of a monastery here? No, she's embarrassed. I know you're supposed to have noble silence, but noble silence doesn't apply when I ask you a serious question. Not always. But anyway, I think that many people value meditation more and more. And I think this was some years ago. Some of my friendly monks over in San Francisco said, if you put that on your resume, that you've been meditating and are good at it and get this reference, say, from a monk, you're much easier to employ. They know that you can work hard without complaining. You're impossible to get exploited. And your quality of your work goes up when you meditate. And you don't get so sick. And that's, I remember some of the monks saying years ago, that if you can verify that you meditate regularly, your health insurance premium really goes down. You don't have to pay so much as others. So that's why it's a growing industry. Anyway, if we died before enlightenment, what can we do in that state? Just follow the light? You know that many times people get enlightened or stream winning as they die. You know, once the five senses vanish, that's called death. Then they can get stream winning at the very end. There was this one monk. No, sorry, not monk. His name was... It was Siddhartha? No, it was another monk. Sarakani, in the suttas. Sarakani. And when he passed away, the Buddha said that was the stream winner just passed away. And then the lay people complained. That fellow was a drunkard. He drank alcohol. You know, are you lowering the standards these days? You know, can drunkards become stream winners? Aren't you supposed to have some precepts? And what they said was, he had so much faith in the very end of his life that he got that stage of stream winning just as he died. Living until the last minute. Very unlikely, but he did it. So, that's not an invitation to go out tonight to the pub and have something to drink. It's just saying what can happen sometimes at the very end. You've got a letting go happening. You're letting go of all your family, all your possessions. You can't take anything with you. Even though this lawyer I heard about in Australia, you know, he was on his deathbed and he thought he was always just rebellious. He says, I'm a lawyer, I'm smart. Sure, there must be some way to take all of my hard-earned earnings with me into death. Because he was just laying on his bed all day, he finally figured it out. Not that hard. What he did, he told his wife, go to the bank, take these 2 big suitcases, which I have, and fill them with high denomination currency. I think that's euros, has got the highest value note. I did ask people this, but I keep forgetting it's not quite important to me. I would never do this. So I think with 1,000 euro notes. So pack them into the suitcase, make them full. I've got enough money in the bank. Pack them into the 2 suitcases. And very carefully place those suitcases in the attic above my bed. There's one on the left, one on the right. So when I go up after death, I can grab those 2 suitcases and take them with me up to heaven. Kind of a nice idea. So his wife, you know, was, okay, if that's what you want to do, I'm not complaining. It's really impossible to argue with a lawyer. So anyway, that's what she did. And she said, followed the instructions right above where he was laying, so he could grab them as he went up. And then a few days later, he passed away. And after all the ceremonies of funeral and arranging everything, when she had a spare few moments, she went up into the attic. And those 2 suitcases were right where she left them, still full with money. And to herself she said, stupid husband. I know which way he was going. He should have put them in the room underneath his bed. So the only thing you can take with you is your stupidity. Okay. Are you still happy for more questions? How can I start putting myself first and doing things in service of myself, when my conditioning and upbringing has been to sacrifice myself to keep others happy? It is easy for me to blame myself and be manipulated to feel guilty, so I behave in ways that make people not angry with me, and I forget what I want. My life seems wasted, and I feel abandoned and left behind. Thank you. If you feel guilty, please get a teddy bear and stroke it. 100 strokes of the teddy bear. Learn some compassion to yourself. And that's the best way you can serve others. I like to see happy people. Don't you like to see happy people? And as for me, we would like to keep asking questions of me until I drop down dead. Is that going to be of service to you next year when I don't turn up? So the best thing is actually care for people, and that's the best way you can care for yourself. So don't need to self-sacrifice. If the meditation object is breath, is vitakka the bringing of the mind's focus to the breath when the mind goes out towards thought? Is vichara keeping the mind focused on the breath after vitakka pulls the focus to the breath? No. Vitakka vichara is especially two aspects of the first jhana. The breath is gone by now, but vitakka vichara is the mind moving onto something, subverbally. Vichara is like holding on to something, not with thought, not intentionally. It means you're not confident enough to do the last bit of letting go. Vitakka vichara is not thinking, it's not pondering. That's impossible in these jhanas. What it does do, the object of the jhana, what you're focusing on, is not the breath. The breath has done its job. You can't, land an aircraft in this room. You have to get off the aircraft, get off the car, take off your shoes, and that's how you can come in this room. By this time, thought is just disturbing. That's one of the questions I ask people. You just been in a jhana? What were you thinking? I was thinking how wonderful this is. I'm in a jhana at last. That couldn't have been a jhana. You know, in silence, without thought. Be verbal. And so, what happens, vitakka vichara, is because you're holding on to this blissful experience of the first jhana, which is not just called Sambodhi Sukha. Sometimes the Buddha describes it as Nekama Sukha, the bliss of renouncing. You've let go of so much of life. Temporarily, but you still let go while you're in that jhana. And that bliss is what draws the mind into it. It's really attractive. No, you don't so decide to look at it, it pulls you in. And it's a pleasant thing to be pulled in like that, and you enjoy yourself immensely. And the vichara is you hold on to it, your confidence hasn't fully formed. So after a while, because of holding on to it, you move away from it. And then you go on to it again, you're pulled into it. Getting pulled into it is what the vitakka means. The vichara is when you're holding on to it, what causes it to disappear. And that's why there's an experience between the first and second jhanas. It's usually just, I would always call that a special case of second jhana. You're still holding on to that beautiful, blissful object in deep meditation. But the holding on is so light, You don't go away from that object. So there's no need for any vitaka. The vitaka goes first. Vichara is left, but so light, it's almost indistinguishable from a second jhana. I don't know if that makes any sense, but maybe you may remember it. But vitaka vichara, in the context of a jhana, certainly, absolutely, does not mean thinking. Dear Ajahn, thank you very much for your talk. What should I put in priority? Learn being kindness or stillness? They go together. Top priority should be both. Don't discriminate there. The only way to be really still is to be kind. The only way to be kind is to be really still. And it becomes a natural outflowing of the mind. 8:42. This is 12 minutes of overtime. The last question. I love animals and often try to do loving kindness on them, such as a crow or squirrel that visits my house often. My issue is that after taking that animal as the recipient of my loving kindness, the next time it sees me, it runs away and seems to be a bit frightened. I consider why that is. Some animals seem okay, but several seem to hide from me after I send them loving kindness, not sure why. If it's unconditional loving kindness, you don't demand anything back from the animal. Then the animal feels safe. So make the loving kindness unconditional. Don't expect anything from the animal at all. May you be happy and well, no matter what you do. Remember, the animal doesn't belong to you. It doesn't live in a house. So sometimes you can just put some food out there for it, or some water, and then see what the animal does. I love animals in the wild because they haven't learned to be afraid of humans. And some of those animals I remember in that monastery in the north of Thailand. I used to put a bowl of water out for them during the hot season. Sorry, not the hot season, during the very hot season. The hot season, the animals thought it was the cold season, but this was the hot season. So, very hot season. So I put some water out for them, and I just, sometimes in the afternoon, through a knot hole in the wood of my hut, I would observe them when they were drinking. And I was, again, astounded that these birds of so many different species would form a queue. They would line up, a big bird and a small one, and then a tiny one and another bird, totally different species. And they would always wait for the one in front to drink first or bathe, and when they flew away, the next one would go in. They were so well ordered, and that was in Thailand. Human beings in Thailand wouldn't act like that. They would try and jump the queue whenever they could. But these birds they were natural birds in a forest a long way away from towns or cities. And I would be so delighted to see the way they would line up and wait. But then there was always one bird who would come, like the alpha male, would jump the queue. I'm more important, so went in there first. Then the other birds would get out of queue, and they'd beat that queue jumper up, peck him and drive him away. And when he'd drive away, they'd all go in the queue again, in the same order they were in before they drove the queue jumper away. And I thought, these were birds, so many different species, and they could cooperate. Why can't human beings do that? And I love those birds, and seeing them do that was totally unexpected, but very nice to see. Those are the sort of animals which I see, without interfering with them. I just admired just how well ordered and kind they were to one another. Okay, so that's... Is anyone... Okay, thank you. If anyone's got any more questions, tomorrow. Thank you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.